me something to hope for, something to believe. Can you tell me you want more for you and me? Give me something to hope for, something to believe. Can you tell me you want more for you and me? I have a dream today.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of #LITA, where love is the answer. My name is Jeff Connor, and I am the host of this show. And this week, I wanted to just take a few minutes and talk with you. No guests this week. I just want to talk about why I started this #LITA movement. So I started #LITA when our youngest son died this past November 12th of 2019. Waylon James was our youngest son. He was 17 when he passed. And Waylon passed by his own actions, by his own hand. Now, initially, we thought that Waylon died by suicide. What we've come to believe, based on some of the evidence and some interactions with the sheriff's department, is that Waylon probably was participating in what they call the choking challenge. Now, the choking challenge, for those of you who don't know, and if you've got children, especially teenage children, you're going to want to pay attention to this. The choking challenge is a game where kids are cutting off their air supply and the blood flow through their carotid artery to their brain. And they do this to get a high from it. It's a euphoric feeling that you get, I guess, as you are losing consciousness. Many times kids will do these with another kid present so that when they do lose consciousness, there's somebody there to take them out of that dangerous situation. But a lot of kids do it by themselves, and we think that's what Waylon was doing. Whether he was trying to get that euphoric feeling or try to scare us, we're not really sure. We just know that based on the way that that he was found and what the police and detective told us, that he was standing on the ground and he just kind of leaned into the strap. And what we've learned is that they don't understand a lot of times how fast they lose consciousness. And it takes just a matter of like 6 to 9 seconds once they cut off that blood flow with whatever device they're using. It takes about 6 to 9 seconds to lose consciousness. Well, if you're all alone and you lose consciousness and you've got a strap or a rope around your neck, you're not going to recover from that. Unfortunately, that's what we think happened with Waylon. And prior to this, Waylon was going through some difficulties. He had been in the hospital for some episodes of mental illness, and we were working actively to get him help. In fact, the night that he died, his mother, Carrie, and I were at a local restaurant visiting with a family therapist who was helping to give us strategies to help Waylon just do better and help us help him, because my methods, I was seeing that the methods that I knew, what I knew wasn't working and wasn't serving Waylon. And so I just wanted to start learning different ways to interact to help hold him, accountable, but then also to be more patient and understanding of some of the things he was going through, and at the same time be able to guide him in a better way. We had some incidents that day. Waylon was a little upset with us from some of the things that he had done. That day, we left him alone, went to that meeting, came home. I walked in, the music was blaring. I couldn't yell at him because it was so loud. Went downstairs, and then that's when I ended up finding him. And it was the mental health, the mental illness aspect of this that really bothered me. Mental health is this thing that I talk about of it being on a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, mental health is, we're good. And if we're really good, things are positive and optimistic. We're creative and imaginative. And then on the very other end of that mental health spectrum would be more of these diagnosed type of mental illnesses, like schizophrenia or borderline personality disorder, things like that. And in the middle, you've got, On different spots of the spectrum, you've got things like depression and anxiety, or just some really stinking thinking, as Zig Ziglar used to say. Just that negative pessimism that people end up with in just ordinary life. And so I think all human beings, if you look left, you look right, front, back, and you see another person, I think we can be pretty sure that they're going through something. They're thinking about something, and that those thoughts aren't always necessarily healthy and serving. And that's kind of where Waylon was, and where frankly I had been for a long period of time. When Waylon died, it just struck me then that we aren't nice to people that don't behave as we would like them to behave. Sometimes we can be downright mean. I remember in grade school, and there were children, that behaved differently because of whatever they had going on. We weren't always real nice to them, and that's where a lot of bullying came. And I think it's even happening today a little bit. And what just struck me when Waylon passed was that we just need to really be kind to one another. We need to love one another. There are people all around us who are struggling with something, who are going through something, and if we just realize that all the time, if we just took that into account all the time and acted in a way that, we loved one another, we're nice, we're kind, we're patient, imagine the impact that would have on people. From my point of view, part of our problem in this society when it comes to mental illness is that we aren't kind and nice to those people. Like I've said, even in the media, you watch TV shows and movies and things like that, and how are people who are experiencing mental illness often portrayed? Now, I think that's getting better today, but for a long period of time, we really ostracized and made it a very bad thing to have a mental illness, to have any type of troubles with your mind, so to speak. I'm happy to say that I believe that's changing, and I think one of the big things that's happening right now is that people are talking about it. They're talking about their battles with depression, with anxiety, with diagnosed, schizophrenias and borderline personality disorders, postpartum depressions, you name it. There's starting to become a lot of information being put out there by people directly experiencing these types of mental challenges. And I think it's going to be those conversations and that love that these people are showing by becoming vulnerable and putting it out there so that all of us can hear. When we hear that movie stars and other celebrities, politicians are facing these types of mental challenges, I think it starts to, in a word, I think almost normalize it, right? Like it is kind of the norm. We're on that spectrum somewhere. And if we can just stop making it bad that we've got some problems with our brain, then I think we'd be a whole lot better off as a society. That's just a little bit of my thinking on mental illness. The hashtag LITA, the hashtag Love is the Answer movement came out of Waylon's death when I wrote his eulogy, if you will. I gave a speech at his memorial gathering, and what I really wanted to convey, there was about probably 300 to 400 high school students in attendance, and I really just wanted to get out there that the answer to these problems in a large part is in love. If we would simply look at someone who's struggling and share our humanity with them, share our love, care about them. When I talk about love in this sense, I'm not talking about a romantic love. I'm talking about, the term is agape, and more like a brotherly love. And the way I like to describe it is that when we look at another human being and we feel a love, it means that we just want the very best for that individual. On my vision board at home, I have a picture of Dr. Martin Luther King, and on that picture is a quote from him. And the quote says, "Agape is disinterested love. Agape does not begin by discriminating between worthy and unworthy people or any other qualities people possess. It begins by loving others for their sakes. Therefore, agape makes no distinction between friend and enemy. It is directed toward both. That's the kind of love that I want to see promoted and spread around this globe, and that's why I started this hashtag movement. I don't want other people to feel alone and feel ostracized by society because they're going through some types of mental challenges. And, let's be clear, mental challenges, mental illness is caused by all sorts of things. We don't really even understand it all, and that's what makes it so tough for us. It's biological, the things that we, are probably hereditary, just development of the brain. So the biology of the brain can cause troubles. I think the inputs that we give it, I like to use the word GIGO, right? Garbage in equals garbage out, GIGO. We hear about that all the time in the business world. But I think even when we look at our own brains, if you're consuming literature, music, television, one of the things I noticed I found on Waylon's YouTube channel is he was listening to a lot of really dark music. And if all we're doing is putting dark and negative ideas into our head because of the consumption of media, there's no wonder that we're going to struggle and that our thoughts are going to be impacted by that. And then just the very thinking that we do is changing our brain. There's a lot of neuroscience out there that talks about how the neural pathways of our brains are changing based on our experiences, the things that we learn, the things that we do, the thoughts that we're having are actually changing the way that our brain is working. And so it's, to me, just very important, and I wanted to communicate that in a loving way to these folks in attendance. Be a guard to what's going into your mind every day. Don't just mindlessly consume garbage, because if you do, you can't expect anything other than garbage to come out. So Waylon's death was really when I first started coining that phrase, love is the answer. And then I started just making most of my posts on social media, I would end with hashtag LITA, hashtag love is the answer. And then with the death of George Floyd here over the last couple of weeks, so it's June 15th today, I believe that he died Memorial Day, and it was May 25th. And because of that, and just watching the way that people were showing up in ways that weren't really loving, there were lots of people who were, but there was so much content being put out there on social media. And then politically, we're in that season now of politics, and I've watched as political opponents and just people with all sorts of differing views on social media have responded to hate in some of the most hateful of ways. And I wanted to start kind of calling that out a little bit and talking about how if we want to respond to hate, we need to do it in loving ways. We need to do it in ways that can actually change minds maybe and help to influence somebody to a better, more loving viewpoint. I didn't just all of a sudden come up with this viewpoint and this idea that love is the answer. It had actually been coming about for years. To understand really where I'm coming from, we have to go back, probably back to about 2013. In 2012, my dad had a seasonal pig roasting business and catering business up here in Minnesota, and I bought it from him in 2012. At the time, I was working as an insurance agent. I wanted to grow this business. I wanted to be able to stop doing insurance and just become a full-time business owner. And my idea was never to be an operator. I always loved the idea of owning the business, and I can even remember telling my dad that, hey, if I'm roasting pigs in 5 years, I'm going to consider myself a failure. Not that there's anything wrong with roasting pigs. I needed people who did that, but it just wasn't what I wanted to do. I love the idea of building a business, creating something, building a team, and developing a team, and all of those fun things that we think about business. And I didn't want to be stuck in the operations of that business long term. So I really, upon buying this business, really started to look for ways to grow it and turn it into more of a year-round business that could employ me and provide an income for me and people on my team. We grew that first year quite a bit, and to the point where we needed to find a bigger space to operate out of, and we needed a commercial kitchen a little bit closer into the town where we were serving. We found that commercial kitchen, I found it attached to a 20,000 plus square foot event center, and started talking to the owner. One thing led to another, and we were able to move in there within about a month and a half of starting those conversations. The initial terms of our lease let me not have to make payments on rent for about the first 6 to 8 months. We had a list that the place had been closed down. The former caterer had just stopped operating, and so the place had shut down, and we were getting all of those customer lists and things like that. And I had these great big ideas that we were going to make a lot of money doing catering, and we'd bring back all these customers. So that was about the end of April. We started going through the list, and everybody had already found new venues. Went through the summer. We're kind of doing all right through the summer. Get to about August, and I sit down and I'm looking at what I've got on the calendar, the amount of money in the bank account, the amount of money coming in, our prospects for new business. And I just had one of those moments where I said, oh, crap. I'm about to lose everything. And I really was convinced that I was about to file bankruptcy and lose everything, and my wife would divorce me, and I would be alone and destitute. That was the thinking, literally the thinking that was going on in my head when that happened. And I remember going into the one of the local chamber of commerces, and went to the director, Pete, and said, Pete, I need help. I need sales fast. Who do you know who can help me with marketing? Pete gave me 2 names. I assumed that they were marketing experts. When I met with these 2 individuals, one man named John and another, a woman named Barbara, I found out that they were business coaches. In talking with them both, I really enjoyed what both of them were telling me. They both said a lot of the same things, but had a little bit, nuanced differences between the 2 of them. And I ended up choosing Barbara. I don't know where I got the money to pay her. It was about $800 a month to get this business coaching. But I can tell you it's probably one of, if not the very best decision that I've made in my entire life. Hiring Barbara led me to a life of personal growth and personal development. She opened me up to the possibility that the way I'm thinking about the world might not be as accurate as I thought. One of the things I've learned is that when we form a belief, we hold on to those beliefs, and they're really tough to dispel a belief that we have, because a belief is nothing more than a thought that we believe or think is true. And once we think it's true, we're going to typically defend our position on that. She came in and helped me learn how to challenge those beliefs. And through working with her and just listening to other coaches, I've learned how to get rid of my limiting beliefs, or at least start to questioning those limiting beliefs, beliefs that tell us, I'm not good enough, or if I am not good at that, I shouldn't be doing it, or that's just the way I am. Those types of beliefs that hold us back, or who am I to be doing a podcast? Who am I to be writing a book? Who is going to want to listen to what anything Jeff Connor has to say? Those are all kind of examples of limiting beliefs. And through working with Barbara, I was able to start challenging some of those limiting beliefs. The one belief I had is that if you can't pay rent, the landlord's going to kick you out. It seemed pretty simple in my mind. However, when we started to kind of look at it, and Barbara opened me up to the idea that maybe these folks that own the building need or want us in there as much as we want to be there, and maybe there's an opportunity to negotiate. That's what we ended up doing. We ended up staying there for the next couple of years without paying any rent. It was beautiful, and she really opened me up to this idea that It comes from John Maxwell's The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and one of the laws is called the Law of the Lid, and she introduced that to me very early on. And the Law of the Lid basically states that your business is never going to outgrow you as the business owner. So wherever your lid is as the business owner, that's where the lid is going to be for your business. And the only way then to grow beyond that is for the owner to expand his capacity to move his lid, so to speak, a little bit higher. And that's really what I did. I just, really went to work on my own personal development, personal growth. I started reading like crazy. I started going to seminars. I went to Tony Robbins' Business Mastery out in Las Vegas. That was a life-altering experience. As I'm reading and getting into this, too, in about 2016 in the fall, I just kind of realized that I'm not capable by myself of doing this, and I'm not in control. I think a lot of us live under this illusion that we're somehow in control over all of the things that happen to us, and we're just not. And so I had this real surrender moment back in the fall of 2016 where I just kind of threw up my hands and said, okay, God, this is beyond my capabilities. I give up, and I'm going to devote this business to you. I just kind of turned it over. It was a surrender moment, and that moment didn't come quickly either. To get to that moment where I could surrender to God, I really needed to believe in God. And for a long period of my life, due to a lot of different circumstances, and this show is going to purposefully kind of skate around religion in a lot of ways. I think that, spiritually speaking, we're each on a path, and we each have to kind of figure out what is our own internal truth. And a lot of our problems come from folks that think that their truth is the same truth that everyone has. And I know that my viewpoints are not the same truth for everybody, and some people may even get offended by them. So I purposefully will stay away from a lot of my own beliefs about spirituality and religion, and talk about it in a little bit more vague term. I, for many years, had been an atheist. I just couldn't imagine that there was a God out there who would allow the things that are happening in this world to happen if he could do something about it. It just didn't make sense to me. And a lot of that is just because of my own, arrogance in believing that if I don't understand it, then, it can't be right or it can't be true. One of the things that I always remember thinking, as this practicing atheist, was I would look at people who had a belief in God and could turn and pray to a God and feel a certain amount of envy. And so I say to a lot of people that I'm a doubting atheist. At that time, I would sit back and just think to myself, how awesome would that be to have this faith in a God who was there to help you? Just be able to have that somebody else, that it's not all on your shoulders kind of mentality. And intellectually, though, I just could not get there. I couldn't allow myself intellectually to develop a faith, to believe that there would be a God out there. But I always wanted to believe, I guess, and I kept searching. And I read a lot of books, read Mere Christianity and by C.S. Lewis, and that had a really big impact. My dad, he also gave me a couple of books. He worked for a company called Service Master, and Service Master was started by a man named Marion Wade, who is was very active in his spirituality and ran his business, wrote a book even called The Lord is My Counsel. One of the CEOs for that company also wrote a book called Soul of the Firm, and they just talked about how they were living their lives and running their business for a higher purpose and for God. And I remember reading those, and just through reading that and reading the Mere Christianity and just thinking about it, I also read another book called Mentored by a Millionaire by Stephen K. Scott. Stephen Scott, you may remember the infomercials on the Total Gym with Chuck Norris and Christy Brinkley. In his book, though, he talked about his conversion from atheism to a belief in God by reading the C.S. Lewis book, Mere Christianity. And I guess it was just all of that combined together that led me kind of to this moment of spiritual awakening. And I've been on this spiritual journey ever since. And it's been fun, but it's also been taxing. I say taxing because when it comes to like spirituality and religion, I wanted answers. I wanted proof and concrete evidence. And there was so much information out there that was contradictory and opposing. And it's, I'm still on a journey. I think that our spirituality, however we show up with that, is a lifelong journey. And we're constantly wrestling with questions, I think, about our existence and things like that. But anyways, I just wanted to share that with you so you kind of got a sense for part of what led me to those words, LITA, Love is the Answer, at Waylon's memorial gathering. It was that turning over to God, that developing of this spirituality, a development of positivity, cultivating a positive and optimistic mindset that took years and years for me to develop, and I'm still developing it and still working on it. One thing I've come to realize too, I started going to some men's support group meetings for men with depression and anxiety, and one of the gentlemen that was leading the group, he made a comment one day that, our happiness takes work. We don't get to just wake up in the morning and go about our lives and have everything fall into place and have our just happy mindset. It takes deliberate, conscious effort, I think, on a daily basis to cultivate happiness. And you'll hear me at some point, I'll talk about, my 3 ideas, and I'll go into them more in detail. Just to introduce them now, I would say that the 3 main components that cause our happiness are, 1, our relationships, making sure that we have good and loving relationships. That's where love comes in. Number 2 is gratitude, having a love for the events and circumstances, the people, the things in our life, focusing on that gratitude rather than on complaining or pointing out the lack that we have in our life. If we would just simply identify and be grateful for the things that we do have going good in our life, that goes a long way towards helping us with our happiness. And then the third thing that I've really found that's helped me with my happiness would be that cultivation of a positive and optimistic mindset. And that's what was really missing back when I hired Barbara and what needed to be developed by me. And it took me several years, 3, 4, 5 years to get to a point where I could actually think optimistically about the future. I think a lot of people could identify with the notion that we worry, we feel this fear and anxiety over the future. And tell me if you've said this or heard other people say it, that, hey, if I'm not worried about something, I'm going to get blindsided. If I'm not worrying about it, I'm going to get caught with my pants down and the worst will happen and I won't even be ready for it. So at least by worrying about it, I can start taking action to prevent it. And that was kind of my mindset. For many years in the business, running my business, I would be faced with, looking at the upcoming quarter and needing to bring in $250,000 of sales. My mindset would always go to what will happen when we don't make those sales. Never did I think or allow myself to imagine what life will be like when we do make those sales. It's a huge difference. That's a flip of a switch right there when you change that mindset from negative, expecting the negative, to expecting the positive. And one of my heroes, you're going to hear me talk about him a lot, is Tony Robbins, and he was probably the first person to ever really help me get this understanding about how important it is to have the right mindset, to focus our attention on positivity and optimism and getting ourselves into a good state. And he would say where focus goes, energy flows. So if you're focused on the negative, you're going to get negative energy, and that's going to come back to you. If you focus on the positive and are optimistic, then you're going to see more positive and optimistic results. And I've come to learn too that a lot of what happens to us is really a choice on how we're going to respond to it. We're either going to see the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. And I've found that my happiness skyrockets when I focus on the half full glass. When other people get lemons, and get sour, I make lemonade. And I know that these are, pretty simple platitudes, but they're really true. And in my life, I've found that they bear fruit, that positivity and optimism. Another big hero of mine, and I hope to one day have him on this podcast, that helped me. My daughter gave me a book by Martin Seligman, and I always say that he's probably the father of positive psychology. And he wrote a book called Learned Optimism that was huge in terms of helping me develop and cultivate this optimistic viewpoint. So this optimism, developing happiness, reading the Gospels out of the Bible, reading the Book of Joy, which is a book that was written about a week-long conversation between the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. They talk a lot about love and just loving other people and loving them, as Martin Luther King said, for their sakes, not for any other reason. And it was through all of this reading, through all of that compiling of information and just sitting with that information, that I started to really cultivate this mindset that love is the answer. And I've just watched it played out. I mentioned a few moments ago about Tony Robbins introducing me to that idea of where energy flows, or where focus flows, energy goes. He also talks a lot about state management, and that was another huge thing that I learned, is that, how we show up to other people has a big impact on our interactions, on the quality of those interactions. And when I was always living in this pessimistic kind of mindset, always expecting the worst, and always being a victim of circumstance, then my moods were always predicated on what was going on. If we were making sales, I was in a good mood. And if we weren't making sales, I was in a really bad mood. If business was going good, I was good. Not going good, I was not going well. My team never knew which Jeff was going to show up. And I realized that I was probably that person who, when they walk through the door, everybody tries to look busy and turn away so that Jeff wouldn't come up and talk to them, because they never knew whether I was going to be happy or mad or whatever in between. That's no way to grow a business. When you've got teammates who aren't happy to see you as the leader come in the door, you're probably going to be struggling. And I will tell you, we were struggling. It was rough for a long period of time. Once I learned how to manage my state, and I made this commitment that I was going to always show up in a beautiful state, that I was always going to be positive and optimistic. I would never get in front of my team again, whether one-on-one or in a group, and be anything less than in a beautiful state. And in a beautiful state, that's where, you're creative, you're inquisitive, you're curious, you're looking for answers, you're giving energy to others. And when you're in a negative state, you're, moody, pessimistic, negative, not fun to be around. And you can see it, the type of people that do that. I used to do it. I would suck the energy out of the room. I was always looking for people to give me energy. A really great illustration of this is, I can remember when I first started attending church services, and when I would go there at first, I went there because I needed to feel better. So I was looking to have the energy of the church, the music, the sermon, the people feed me. And I was just taking that energy, and I needed it. And I'm so grateful that I was getting it. But the shift came as I started to change and become this more positive and optimistic person, as I started to care more about other people. Then I would go to church and I would want to become a part of giving that energy through my worship, through caring about other people. I would look to how can I help serve someone else? Is there someone who is feeling like I used to that I could maybe make a difference in their lives? And it was that moment when I realized that I saw that real difference between a positive, beautiful state and an angry, negative state. It's just a matter of energy. Are you giving energy to others, or are you sucking energy out of the room and taking it for yourself? And there are times when we need to do both. But if you're living that life of constantly sucking energy, you're probably not experiencing the best life that you can experience. Desmond Tutu, actually, I think it was the Dalai Lama in that book that I mentioned a minute ago called Joy. He talks about that and you read it in many different places, many of the, I think, world religions and just, common sense. When we're feeling at our lowest and really kind of a stress and anxiety, the one thing that I've found to always help me is to get out of my own head and help someone else, to serve someone else, to care more about someone else than I care about my own circumstance or what's going on in my own life. And every time I've ever done that, I have noticed a dramatic change in the way that I feel. My positivity and optimism just kind of, they skyrocket as I get out of my own problems, out of my own head, and just focus on helping other people. It was this shift in mindset, this change in, being a negative, pessimistic, always looking and expecting the worst, to becoming optimistic and always expecting the best. And I want to just clear something up here. A lot of people will say to optimists that we live in this kind of Pollyanna world where we're wearing rose-colored glasses, and that we will get surprised when we do experience problems. And I want to just dispel that and say that that's not the way that I look at the world, and I don't think that other optimists look at the world. It's not that I don't think I'm going to have problems. I know I'm going to have problems. But what I also know is that I can handle any problem that comes up. I can choose what kind of an attitude I'm going to have about whatever circumstance shows up in my life. I can choose to look at problems as growth opportunities, as ways that I'm going to be able to improve and get better and get stronger. So I don't have this mindset that problems won't occur. I have this mindset that when they do occur, I'll figure it out. Again, Tony Robbins loves to say, there's always an answer. There's always a way. And I've come to realize that truth, that there's always a way. John Maxwell says it too when he talks about creativity and flexibility. He defines creativity as knowing that there's always an answer. And then he defines flexibility as knowing that there's always more than one answer. And I'm sure we'll get into over the course of this shows, I'll share with you some examples and things like that from my life that really prove this, that there have been times in this business, and to be clear, my business is not completely out of the woods right now. We're still working to grow and to, we moved into this event center. At the time, I had no idea even what a break-even number was, the amount of money that we needed to bring in revenue in order to just pay the bills and not necessarily make profit, but just break even. I had no idea. What we've come to learn, when I moved into that building, our revenues at the catering company were about $170,000. The break-even amount that we needed based on the margins at that time, just to break even in that 20,000 square foot event center, was a little over $2 million. That is humongous growth. And, we made a lot of strides early on, but then we started to hit our challenges again, and we're just now cracking that number. Now, luckily, we've done some things to drive that break-even number down by improving our margins, but like I said, we're not out of the woods, and I feel like we're on the right path, and I feel very optimistic about our abilities to do it. Will we not face any more problems? Well, we're right in the middle of being shut down. We haven't done any catered weddings this year because of COVID-19 and the quarantine. So yeah, we're still going to face problems just like everybody else does. But we'll learn from these problems, and we'll grow from these problems. And I made an observation the other day that maybe can help too in that. And one of the things that I realized is that we as human beings, when an obstacle gets put in front of us, a lot of times we will pause and we will lament the fact that there is an obstacle in front of us, and we will cry because the way has been thwarted for us in some way. And when you watch other animals, I think an ant is one of the most perfect examples of this. When you watch an ant and you put a barrier between where they are and where they want to go, they do not stop for more than a beat. And then they're moving in another direction. They're either going up the obstacle, or they're turning right or turning left and going around it. They may go backwards to try to find a new path. The one thing they don't do is they don't stop and cry that their way has been thwarted, that they have an obstacle. They just move beyond the obstacle. And I think we can take a lot from that if we would just look at obstacles as nothing more than that, just something that we've got to get around, get over, get through. What we start to learn too is that these obstacles, these problems, they start to help us develop a strength and a resiliency. Think about weightlifters. Weightlifters never ask to have weight removed in order to get stronger. What are they always doing? They're always trying to increase the amount of weight, the amount of reps that they're doing. They're trying to make it harder. And they're doing that to build muscle, to build strength. It's the same thing with our minds. If we want our minds to become stronger, we need to exercise them. We need to work on complex problems. We need to overcome. We need to face situations that require us to persevere. And as we persevere, we then begin to develop a resiliency. And it's that perseverance and that resilient mindset that starts to lead us to some of our greatest successes. It's this perseverance and resiliency that I've been able to develop by facing some of my darkest moments, biggest challenges over the last several years of business ownership that have led me to be sitting here today in front of my computer with a microphone in my face talking to you. If you would have asked me back in 2012, 2013, heck, 2015, 2016, I would have never imagined that I would be sitting here doing a podcast show on love. But I'm here because of the things that I've been through in my life. I'm at a point where I'm doing something that I absolutely love. I've stumbled upon the one thing, the one topic, the one idea, the one cause that I would die for. I would die for this notion of love being the answer. If we just take care of one another, if we love one another, want the best for one another. All of this and everything I've talked about for almost 45 minutes now has really been to just give you some insights into kind of what makes me tick, why I have such a fervor, such a zest for the hashtag LITA movement, why I feel that love is the answer and can overcome so much in our lives. I mean, really, I think love is the ultimate power in the universe. And if we would just simply start interacting with our fellow human beings as if we wanted the best for them. The Dalai Lama in the book, Joy, he said that there are 7.5 billion people on this planet all trying to find happiness. Each of us has a different way that we define happiness and a different way that we go about finding happiness. Sometimes that's not always in a way that helps other people with their happiness, but if we would just simply remember that that's what we're trying to do, we're trying to find our happiness, and we look to help and create an understanding, not necessarily an agreement with other people, but an understanding of why someone might think the way that they think. What might be going on in their lives to put them in that foul mood? What if, their child just died? Lots of times we just make assumptions about people and their dispositions and without giving any regard to what they're going through. And I would just ask, and that's the purpose of this podcast, is to get us to start stopping a little bit and asking ourselves what's going on in this person's life. What might I not understand? What has happened in their life? What's happening right now? What are they going through? Might they have some illness? Something is going on in their life that maybe I don't understand, and maybe by understanding, it would give me a different viewpoint on why they feel the way they do. May not lead me to agreeing with them, but having that understanding can help me continue to want the best for them. And that's what I want for you. That's what I want for our world, is a world where we want the best for one another. And with that, I'm going to end this podcast and just ask you to go out in love, to love one another, to care about each other. If you want to become more a part of this, if you got ideas on shows, if you've got comments, I'd love to hear any feedback that you have. You can find my website at www.litaforlife. That's spelled out LITA-FORLIFE. So that's litaforlife.com. You can also find me on Facebook. My personal Facebook page is at jeff.conner.18. That's jeff.conner.18. Connect with me. Let's have a conversation, share ideas, challenge me on some of my thinking. That's how we get better and grow, is by having these conversations and just always looking for the truth. And I think if we do that in love, we're going to always end up at the right destination. Make sure you come back each week, subscribe to this podcast, the #LITA podcast, and let's just get together every week and have a wonderful Love is the Answer conversation. I love you, my friend. Now go out and love one another.
Give me something to hope for, something to believe. Can you tell me you want more for you?